The glass left the bodybuilder's hand in a flat, angry arc, and the water crossed the table before anyone in the room had time to rename the moment. It struck Bruce Lee across the face and chest, darkening the blue fabric of his long-sleeve shirt, catching in the white stripes, dripping from his jaw to the edge of the wooden table. The woman beside him, in green, froze with her mouth open and one hand pressed to her chest. Plates, menus, and untouched silverware sat between them like evidence. The man who threw it was 6'4", 310 pounds, and fully convinced size had already decided the outcome. What he did not understand was that Bruce Lee did not react to anger. He reacted to structure, and within seconds the larger man would be on both knees, staring at the floor he thought belonged to him. It is the kind of restaurant that trains people to lower their voices without ever asking them to. Warm pendant lights hang over polished wood and amber walls, creating islands of soft illumination that stop just short of one another, so every table feels private while still belonging to the same room. The front windows hold the city at a distance, reflecting neon and passing headlights into muted streaks that never fully enter. Beneath the low music, the room carries its own particular orchestra. Forks touching ceramic, ice shifting inside heavy-bottomed glasses, a server's shoes crossing the floor with practiced restraint, the subdued hiss from the kitchen each time a pan receives oil or meat. The air smells of garlic, soy, seared steak, citrus peel, clean linen, and the faint mineral scent of water poured from cold glass bottles, which is the sort of detail people only notice when a night still believes in its own order. Near the center of the room sits a square wooden table, visible from almost every angle without being exposed, the kind of placement restaurants reserve for chance rather than intention. The grain of the wood is dark and uneven, marked by years of heat, moisture, and small private conversations that leave no record except texture. 2 menus rest near the plates. A dish of sauce reflects the overhead light like a still surface at dusk. Water glasses stand half full. Silverware lies in neat parallel lines that suggest civility can be arranged if not guaranteed. Nothing at the table is dramatic. That is precisely why it matters. Disorder always enters ordinary scenes first, because ordinary scenes make people careless with prediction. Bruce Lee sits on the right side of the table in a dark blue long-sleeve shirt with white stripes running clean along the sleeves. The fit is simple. The posture is not. He does not lean back like a man trying to appear relaxed, and he does not incline forward like a man asking to be taken seriously. He occupies the chair with that specific economy that makes furniture seem incidental, as if stillness is not the absence of action, but the disciplined refusal of waste. Across from him sits the woman he has brought here, wearing a green top that deepens under the amber light. She listens with the alertness of someone who notices tone before content, and that makes the conversation between them unusually clean. They are not filling silence to protect themselves from it. They are letting silence reveal what kind of evening this is, which is how real attention begins to separate itself from performance. Their conversation moves in measured lines: travel, training, the cost of discipline, the hidden burden of being watched by strangers who think visibility means access. Bruce answers with precision rather than display, and each answer seems to end exactly where it should, never one word beyond utility. That restraint alters the atmosphere around the table more than charm ever could. A woman at the bar glances over, then again. A middle-aged couple 2 tables away recognizes him but pretends not to, because mature curiosity often disguises itself as etiquette. A young waitress near the service station notices something she cannot yet name, in the way Bruce keeps one hand resting lightly near the edge of the table, as though readiness and calm are not opposites but parts of the same structure. Then the entrance changes. A larger figure steps through the front door, and the room registers him before it consciously studies him, because size has its own language, and most people understand it long before they admit they do. He is massive through the shoulders and chest, dressed in a black tank top and jeans, moving with the practiced confidence of a man whose body settles arguments before his mouth needs to. Heads lift and then lower again. A host straightens subtly. The rhythm of the room does not break, but it adjusts around him, by a degree so small that only careful people notice it. Bruce notices. He does not turn his head immediately. He does not tense. He only shifts his chair half an inch, which is the kind of movement that reveals a man has already accounted for the possibility of trouble without granting it emotional authority. In places like this, the first true sign of conflict is rarely noise. It is a tension becoming specific. Bruce notices the larger man almost as soon as he steps through the front door, not because he is searching the room for danger in the nervous way lesser men do, but because his attention moves broadly and without strain, touching everything once and missing very little. He registers weight before detail, pace before expression, direction before motive. Then the finer information arrives in sequence: the heavy shoulders under the black tank top, the controlled but irritated gait, the first sweep of the room, the pause when the man recognizes him, and then the second pause, more revealing than the first, when the man's eyes move to the woman in green and then return. Bruce does not interrupt the conversation. He does not stiffen. He only shifts his chair half an inch, freeing the line of his legs beneath the table in case furniture stops being furniture and becomes obstruction, which is the sort of preparation most people never see because they mistake stillness for absence. His date notices the adjustment immediately. She is already learning that with Bruce, small movements are never decorative. They always answer some particular calculation. "Do you know him?" Bruce lifts his water glass first, takes a measured sip and lets the coolness settle before answering. No. The answer is exact, and its exactness matters. He does not know the man personally, but he knows the type at once, a man whose confidence has been rewarded so often by visible size that he has stopped questioning the mechanism beneath it. Not weak, not foolish in any simple sense. Just educated too long by outcomes that flatter the wrong lesson, which is how dangerous assumptions become personality. The woman follows Bruce's line of sight toward the host stand, where the larger man is now speaking too curtly to the host, his voice still low but carrying that compressed edge that tells attentive people the evening has changed categories. He seems upset. Yes. That doesn't concern you? Bruce sets the glass down with quiet precision, the base touching wood with a small dry note that disappears under the music. "Concern is useful," he said. "Fear is expensive." She studies him for a moment after that, not because the words sound theatrical, but because they do not. He says them the way some men describe weather or distance, as if emotion becomes most reliable when it is measured rather than obeyed. Across the room, the jazz record continues in a restrained brass line, and the kitchen breathes garlic, hot oil, and seared meat into the warm air. A waitress named Ellen arrives with a refill pitcher and asks whether they need anything else. Bruce thanks her. The woman asks for another napkin. Ellen notices that Bruce's hands rest lightly near the edge of the table instead of on his lap, and she misreads it as tension because most people have never seen readiness in its quieter form. At the bar, a man who recognizes Bruce from a poster whispers his name to the woman beside him, who looks over and frowns as if she expected someone louder. Some visible performance of legend instead of a man sitting down to dinner under amber light. At the host stand, the larger man's conversation ends. He receives his table. He should follow the server in the opposite direction. Instead, he changes course by only a few degrees, and those few degrees bring him straight toward Bruce's table. The woman in green sees it first and stills mid-breath. Bruce does not turn immediately. He lets the footsteps enter the room fully, heel then forefoot, heavy but controlled, the sound of a man accustomed to taking space without asking. Only when the figure reaches the left side of the table does Bruce look up, and when he does, he appears like a man expecting nothing and surprised by even less, which is often the most unsettling posture in any room. Up close, the scale difference becomes difficult for the room to ignore. The man standing at the left side of the table is built on a different visual grammar from almost everyone around him. 6'4", 310 pounds, shoulders broad enough to interrupt the warm lines of the pendant light, forearms thick with the particular density that comes from years of actual strain rather than decorative training. His black tank top leaves the evidence visible. This is not a man assembled by mirrors alone. His body carries the history of wrestling rooms, weight rooms, and doorways, where presence itself is used as a first instrument of control. That history matters, because false confidence behaves one way, and earned confidence behaves another. And the most dangerous mistakes are often made by men whose previous experiences have taught them the wrong lesson too successfully. Bruce remains seated for one breath longer, studying the man without seeming to study him. His face does not harden, his shoulders do not lift. He simply looks up as though registering weather, and that particular absence of reaction creates a small distortion in the room. Large men are accustomed to producing visible effect: caution, irritation, forced friendliness, defensive humor, some external sign that gravity has been acknowledged. When none appears, they often interpret the absence as disrespect. In reality, they are confronting something far more destabilizing than disrespect. They are confronting someone who does not need to react in order to be ready. The larger man sets one hand on the back of the empty chair opposite Bruce, not sitting, only claiming the space around the table as if ownership can be suggested before it is earned. His jaw is tight, but not wild. That detail is important. Disorderly men can be read quickly. Controlled men with offended pride take longer to reveal themselves because they still believe their anger is rational. "You're Bruce Lee," he said. Bruce answers without haste, his voice low enough that nearby tables have to lean into the silence to catch it. "Yes." The man gives a short nod, as if confirming a private irritation he arrived with before he ever crossed the room. "I've seen the movies." Bruce says nothing. He leaves the sentence where it lands, and the room begins to understand that one of these men needs reaction more than the other does, which is often the first asymmetry that matters. The larger man leans slightly forward, the smell of aftershave and cold night air still clinging to him beneath the heavier scent of sweat dried into cotton. "You're smaller in person." Bruce looks at him with the same calm attention he might give to a factual observation about weather or traffic. "Most people are." It is not a joke, though a few people in the room almost treat it like one. It is simply an exact answer to an exact statement. But wounded pride has a particular habit of hearing insult where precision exists, because precision leaves very little room for self-deception. The woman in green shifts in her seat. She does not interrupt. She understands now that whatever this is, it is no longer random. It is becoming personal in that quiet, highly masculine way where one man decides the room has arranged respect incorrectly. The man's eyes move toward her. "This your date?" she answers before Bruce does, and there is a firmness in it that removes all ambiguity. "Yes." The man smiles, but only with his mouth. "Interesting." That word hangs in the warm air for a moment, carrying more grievance than content. At the bar, the man who recognized Bruce earlier lowers his glass without drinking. Near the service station, Ellen stands with a stack of folded napkins in both hands and does not realize she has stopped moving. The host looks over from the front stand. A middle-aged couple 2 tables away stop pretending not to watch. The room is still functioning, but only technically. Attention has become specific. Bruce remains silent, and the silence works against the larger man more effectively than an argument would. He is used to confrontation taking shape through exchange. Men justify themselves. Men posture. Men narrate their own aggression so they can feel morally centered inside it. Bruce offers him none of that. He is leaving the man alone with his own motives, and that is a cold mirror. "Say something." Bruce's eyes lift a fraction. "About what?" "About me standing here." "You are standing here." The woman in green draws in a small breath through her nose. The line is not aggressive. That is what gives it force. Bruce is not contesting the moment emotionally. He is naming it with almost clinical restraint, and men who rely on intimidation often find naming more threatening than shouting, because naming removes theatre and leaves only behaviour. The larger man's jaw shifts once. He has spent years learning that visible strength settles social equations before they fully form. Former wrestler, competitive bodybuilder, a man who has restrained drunk men outside clubs, broken up parking lot arguments, and lived inside a body that has taught other people to reconsider themselves on sight. None of that is imagined. His confidence comes from real outcomes. That is precisely why his mistake is so complete. He does not misread Bruce because he is foolish. He misreads him because previous victories have trained him to trust the wrong metric. His left hand moves toward the nearest water glass on the table. The motion is small, but it changes the room instantly. The woman in green straightens. Ellen takes one involuntary step forward and stops. The manager, sensing a shift before fully seeing it, begins to emerge from near the bar. Even the music seems to retreat, not in volume, but in significance. Once an object is chosen in anger, the evening becomes measurable. Bruce's eyes drop once to the glass, then return to the man's face. No flinch, no warning, no visible resentment. He is looking for commitment now, because commitment simplifies violence. Once a man gives himself fully to a choice, the available lines narrow, and narrow lines are easier to solve. The larger man tightens his grip on the glass. The muscles in his forearm bunch under the skin. Let's see how calm you are now. He throws the water. The water leaves the glass in a flat, angry sheet and crosses the table before anyone in the restaurant has time to rename the moment. It strikes Bruce across the forehead, cheek, mouth, throat, and chest, darkening the blue fabric of his shirt in irregular shapes that spread quickly through the cotton and settle into the white stripes along the sleeves. Droplets scatter over the menus, the plates, the polished wood, and the woman in green, who recoils on instinct, her mouth opening as one hand rises sharply to her chest, as if she needs contact with her own body to confirm the reality of what has just happened. The splash is louder than water should be, not because the sound itself is violent, but because the room has become so attentive that even a liquid impact acquires the force of a statement, and beneath the warm pendant lights, the table now looks less like a place for dinner than a diagram of insult. For one suspended second, no one moves. Water runs from Bruce's jaw in controlled lines, gathering briefly at the edge of his chin before falling to the table and then to the floor. One drop reaches the cuff of his sleeve and holds there. Another slides along the side of the glass nearest his hand. The woman beside him remains frozen, eyes fixed on his face, waiting for the ordinary male sequence to begin. Shock, anger, retaliation, the fast, ugly escalation that turns public spaces into arenas. Around them, cutlery stills in midair. The manager near the bar stops walking. Ellen, the waitress, feels the linen napkins go slightly damp in her grip because she has tightened her hands without noticing. These are the particular details by which a room reveals that it already understands danger before anyone says so aloud. Bruce blinks once, not quickly, not with the sharp reflex of humiliation. He reaches for a napkin. That movement unsettles the room more than a lunge would have. He does not wipe his face like a man clearing an insult. He dabs once at the corner of his mouth with the same economy he has used all evening, then lowers the napkin to the table with deliberate neatness, as if the physical fact of being wet and the emotional meaning of being challenged belong to separate categories, and he has no intention of confusing them. The larger man watches for an outburst and receives procedure instead. It is a particular kind of frustration for aggressive men, this failure to provoke a visible change in another person's center, because provocation is only satisfying when it produces ownership. Bruce stands. He rises without force and without hurry, which is why the change in the room feels so complete. Seated, he looked contained. Standing, he looks aligned. He is still smaller by every obvious measure. The larger man towers over him, broad through the chest, thick through the shoulders, his black tank top stretched across muscle that has won him many previous arguments. But height and width do not define control here. Structure does. Bruce's feet find the floor in a quiet, organized line. His shoulders remain loose. His face holds no anger, no performative coldness, no need to show the room what he is capable of. The calm is not being assembled in response to the attack. It was already present before the water crossed the table. That distinction is what makes it difficult to misread once seen. The larger man grins once, quickly, mistaking the rise for acceptance of his preferred language. "Good," he says. "Now we're talking." Bruce looks at him through the water still drying on his skin. "No, you are." The sentence lands with almost no weight in the voice, yet it alters the balance of the moment immediately. The larger man wants shared aggression. He wants the scene to become mutual, because mutual conflict allows him to call his own behavior justified. Bruce refuses that structure with 4 words. He returns the ownership cleanly. The insult, the disturbance, the pressure in the room, all of it belongs to the man who created it. The woman in green sees this before anyone else does, and some part of her fear changes shape. She is still afraid, But now she is also observing something else. Bruce is not trying to win the room. He is letting the truth of the room expose the other man. She pushes her chair back a few inches, not fleeing, creating space. The scrape of wood against the floor sounds much sharper than it should, because the silence around it has become so exact. At a nearby table, the middle-aged husband lowers his fork entirely and rests it on the plate. His wife places 2 fingers lightly against his wrist, not to stop him, but to ask whether intervention may soon be required. He does not answer. He keeps watching. The manager takes another step forward and then stops when Bruce raises one hand slightly, without looking away from the larger man, a gesture so restrained it might be missed, if not for the fact that the manager obeys it at once. Authority often becomes visible in these small transactions long before it is tested physically. The larger man rolls his shoulders once, loosening them beneath the tank top as though preparing not merely for contact but for demonstration. The smell of stale sweat and outside air lingers around him, mixed with restaurant heat, garlic and citrus from the nearby dishes, and the combination gives the moment a specific human density. Nothing about it feels theatrical. It feels close. His pride has now moved beyond irritation into commitment, which means he no longer wants a correction. He wants submission. "I'm giving you a chance." Bruce's expression does not change. To do what? To act like a man? There it is at last, the private belief made audible. The larger man has reduced masculinity to a visible willingness to dominate or answer domination with the same blunt vocabulary. In his mind, Bruce's self-control has become an insult because he reads refusal as weakness. Men like this do not always begin with cruelty. Many begin with a narrow definition of strength and spend years mistaking that narrowness for truth. That is what makes them dangerous and, in a particular way, predictable. Bruce says, "Sit down." He does not raise his voice. He does not threaten. The sentence sounds less like an order than a final administrative option, one last chance to preserve dignity before consequence becomes physical. The larger man laughs once and there is relief in it, because a command at least feels like engagement. The manager tries again. "Gentlemen?" "Stay back," Bruce says, still without turning. The manager stops. The waitress near the service station stops breathing for a second. At the bar, the man who recognized Bruce from the posters mutters something under his breath that no one nearby quite catches. The jazz continues overhead, but now it sounds far away, like music from another building, because once bodies decide to test hierarchy directly, every other layer of atmosphere becomes secondary. The larger man reaches out and plants 2 fingers against Bruce's wet chest, right over the sternum where the shirt clings to the skin. It is not a shove yet. It is worse in a way. It is contempt compressed into contact, a small trespass intended to tell the room that Bruce's boundaries can be edited by anyone larger and more willing. Bruce lowers his eyes to the fingers, studies them for the briefest moment, then lifts his gaze back to the man's face. "Remove your hand." The words are quiet and exact. No heat, no plea. Just a boundary spoken as fact. The larger man leaves his fingers there a fraction longer, then increases the pressure. The touch becomes a push. Plates tremble slightly on the table. The water in the remaining glass quivers. The woman in green rises now, fully out of her chair, both for distance and for sightline, because fear always wants a clearer view of the thing it cannot stop. Bruce yields 1 inch. Only 1. To the larger man, it feels like confirmation. To Bruce, it is information, direction of force, weight transfer, which foot carries commitment, which shoulder tightens first, whether the push is coming from arm, chest or floor. There is nothing passive in this small concession. It is measurement under contact, and measurement is how disciplined men turn chaos into usable structure. The larger man pushes again, harder. "Hit me," he says. Bruce answers, "No." The room tightens around that word, short, final, without apology, without fear. The larger man draws his right hand back now, preparing for the next move, not because the refusal has calmed him, but because it has wounded the specific belief he came here to defend. His torso angles forward. His weight commits to the lead leg. His left shoulder narrows. He is no longer reading Bruce at all. He is performing himself. And the moment a man begins performing dominance instead of perceiving reality, the body starts making promises it cannot keep. And then he reaches. Not wildly, not with the loose disorder of a drunk man falling into a decision he has not fully made. He reaches with purpose, which is precisely why the moment becomes solvable. His right hand comes forward toward Bruce's shirt collar in a public control gesture, the kind larger men use when they no longer want to argue and instead want the room to watch hierarchy become physical. His torso follows the hand. His lead leg takes the commitment. His shoulder narrows his own vision. He is no longer studying Bruce. He is advancing the version of the scene that already exists in his mind, and that is the particular instant when experienced men begin to lose fights they do not yet know they are in. Bruce moves only when the reach becomes honest. His left hand meets the wrist before the fingers close on fabric, not with a slap, and not with anything theatrical enough for the room to fully register as defense. It is placement. Thumb, fingers, angle, contact, all arriving with the particular calm of a man touching a fact rather than resisting an attack. At the same time, he steps off the center line by a margin so small it looks from a distance almost incidental. But the step is not retreat. It is removal. He is taking his body out of the path where size would matter most and guiding the larger man into a line where commitment can no longer travel cleanly. The bodybuilder feels the interruption and tries to correct it with strength. That instinct has served him well for years. When a line breaks, drive more force through it. When resistance appears, increase pressure until the resistance reorganizes around you. In most rooms, against most men, that principle works often enough to feel like truth. Here, it becomes the exact mechanism of failure. Bruce's right forearm enters the space near the upper arm and chest, not as a strike, not as a visible blow for the witnesses to admire, but as a wedge. It edits the connection between shoulder and torso at the precise moment the bodybuilder needs that connection to remain unbroken. The difference is invisible to untrained eyes and devastating inside the body. The large man is still strong. He is simply no longer strong in the direction he believes he is moving. Bruce's hips turn a fraction. No flourish, no broad demonstration. Just enough rotation to send the captured wrist into a new line and turn the elbow into a question the shoulder cannot answer comfortably, while the feet remain where they are. The bodybuilder's posture shifts forward by degrees, and confusion reaches his face before pain does. That sequence matters. Pain can be dismissed by pride. Confusion is harder because confusion announces that the body is entering a map the mind did not prepare for. The woman in green has both hands near her mouth now, not screaming, not speaking, just staring with the fixed concentration people get when the world stops matching the script they had braced themselves for. She had expected impact in the ordinary masculine vocabulary of swings, grappling, loud effort, furniture displaced by brute insistence. What she sees instead is something narrower and far more unsettling. Bruce is not colliding with the bodybuilder. He is making the bodybuilder collide with his own structure. Bruce gives him one sentence: let go. He says it quietly, with no strain in the voice, and that quietness tells the room something important. This is not revenge. It is an exit still being offered inside the mechanics of control. Bruce never escalates for drama. He offers the simplest solution available until the other man refuses it completely. The bodybuilder does refuse it. Pride is often most stubborn at the exact moment reality becomes undeniable. He tries to muscle through the pressure, shoulder bunching, neck tightening, chest driving forward in a final effort to recover the kind of contest he understands. Bruce is already past that point. His lead foot touches the outside of the bodybuilder's planted foot, not kicking, not sweeping in a broad cinematic gesture, just occupying the piece of ground the larger man will need for recovery a half-second later. At the same time, the wrist rotates another measured degree, and the pressure near the upper arm changes direction just enough to send the shoulder forward without warning it first. The sequence is so compact that witnesses later struggle to describe it. Most of them speak of speed because speed is the easiest label available to people who do not understand economy. But what happens here is not mere quickness, it is timing stripped of decoration. The first knee touches the hardwood. The sound is blunt and private, a hard contact between body and floor that carries through the room more clearly than any shout would have. A collective breath leaves the nearby tables. The manager stops mid-step. Ellen, still holding folded napkins she no longer remembers picking up, feels her fingers go numb around the linen. At the bar, the man who recognized Bruce lowers his head slightly, as if proximity alone might help him understand what he is seeing. One knee on the floor is not yet surrender, but it is no longer dominance. It is the body admitting that the geometry has changed. The bodybuilder tries to rise immediately. That attempt is important, because it confirms what this moment is and what it is not. He is not weak. He is not collapsing from fear. The strength in him is real. It surges through the back, the legs, the thick muscles under the black tank top, all of it trying to restore the simple vertical certainty he walked over with. For one brief second, it almost looks possible, and in that second, the larger truth of the scene becomes even clearer. Bruce is not benefiting from luck or surprise alone. He is solving legitimate force in real time. He shortens the space by inches. His center lowers half a level, spine still upright, shoulders still loose, the wet fabric of his shirt cooling against the skin, while the room's warm air settles around both men. The wrist control tightens, not maximally, not punitively, just enough to convert resistance into consequence. The pressure through the arm and shoulder spirals downward in a line so exact that the larger man's options narrow all at once. The blocked foot cannot recover. The torso cannot square. The free side cannot arrive in time. Bruce is beside him now rather than in front of him, which is why the size difference has become almost meaningless. There is nothing for the 310 pounds to drive into except emptiness and leverage. The second knee meets the floor. Now both are down, not flat on his face, not broken, not theatrically ruined. On his knees, torso pitched forward, one hand searching instinctively for the floorboards, the other still trapped in a structure he cannot solve by strength alone. The title becomes true in the plainest possible way. Moments after throwing water across a date-night table to announce public humiliation, the larger man is kneeling under the control of the man he thought he could provoke into disorder. The reversal does not feel dramatic from Bruce's side. It feels administrative, like a problem reduced to its smallest correct answer. No one speaks. Water still drips from Bruce's sleeve cuff. A plate on the table has shifted half an inch and stopped there. The smell of garlic, soy, and cooling meat hangs over the scene with almost offensive normality, as if the restaurant refuses to become an arena simply because one man tried to turn it into one. The bodybuilder breathes hard now, not from injury, but from the shock of encountering a specific limit his size cannot negotiate. He tries once more to surge upward, less from strategy than from pride reflex. Bruce increases the pressure by a margin so slight most of the room cannot see it. The surge dies immediately. This ends here. The words are low, calm, final. No anger, no triumph, no lesson performed for the witnesses. The bodybuilder hears what the room hears inside that tone. Bruce could take the moment further if he chose to. He is choosing not to. That recognition lands deeper than pain would. Pain can be framed as bad luck, cheap movement, one wrong step. Mercy cannot be framed that way. Mercy reveals control, and control is what the larger man has been denied from the first contact onward. Bruce holds him there for one breath, then another, long enough for compliance to become real rather than accidental, long enough for the room to understand that this is not a scramble and not a temporary position that might reverse if chance leans a different way. The bodybuilder's breathing steadies into the particular rhythm of a man forced to recognize that continued resistance will only deepen his own exposure. Bruce says, "Stay there." He releases the arm in stages, never abandoning structure too early, each fraction of freedom offered only after the larger man proves he understands the instruction. Then Bruce steps back one measured pace. The bodybuilder remains on both knees, head lowered, one palm against the floor, the wet rings on the wooden table above him, and the amber light on his shoulders making the scene look almost motionless now. What just happened lasts in the room not because it is violent, but because it is exact. And exactness has a way of silencing everyone who expected size to settle the matter. After the second knee meets the floor, the restaurant does not erupt. It recalibrates. That distinction defines the next several minutes more accurately than any louder word could. No one applauds, no one shouts, no one rushes forward to claim moral ownership of the scene. The room simply enters a different arrangement of silence, one in which every object seems to acquire new meaning. A fork remains suspended halfway to a mouth at the next table. Steam continues lifting from a plate near the bar as if heat itself receives no update. The jazz record still turns somewhere overhead, brass low and distant, but it now sounds detached from the room, like music passing through walls from another life. Under the pendant lights, with wet rings still widening on the wooden table, stillness becomes the dominant witness because control always leaves a cleaner residue than chaos. Bruce does not stand over the bodybuilder with the posture of a conqueror. He does something more unsettling than that. He stands as if the confrontation already exists as a finished fact. Water continues to darken the chest and sleeve of his blue shirt. One drop slides from the cuff and strikes the floor near the larger man's hand. His breathing remains even. His shoulders remain loose. He is not savouring the moment. He's waiting to see whether the lesson is understood well enough to let the body decide what the pride still resists. Men who enjoy violence usually grow larger after contact. Bruce appears smaller in a particular way, not physically, but in ego, as if the self steps aside so that only function remains. The woman in green is the first person to move with intention. She lowers her hands from her mouth slowly, as though the nervous system releases them one finger at a time, and then she takes half a step backward from the table, not out of fear of Bruce, but to create a clearer line around the aftermath. Shock does not leave her face, it merely changes its structure. A moment earlier, she braces for brute force to become a public disaster. Now she stares at the aftermath of something colder and more exact. She looks at the bodybuilder on both knees, then at Bruce standing over nothing at all, then at the dishes, the menus, the spilled water, and the absurd ordinariness of the restaurant surrounding all of it. That is often how reality feels after decisive moments. The furniture stays loyal to routine, while the mind struggles to assign a new category to what it sees. The manager arrives within speaking distance and stops there, caught between professional duty and the human recognition that intervention after resolution is mostly ceremony. He asks the larger man whether he is injured, but the question comes out with the uncertainty of someone who no longer knows where authority belongs. The bodybuilder answers without looking up. No. The word is rough, more compressed than pained, carrying the sound of a man who discovers that humiliation and damage are not the same thing. Bruce glances down once and says, "He'll be stiff." Nothing in the tone suggests mockery. If anything, it sounds clinical, almost courteous. That quality changes the emotional temperature of the entire room. Restraint is hardest to process when it arrives without hatred, because hatred would at least explain why the force appears. Ellen, still holding the folded napkins she picks up before the water is thrown, finally starts forward again. She feels foolish for moving slowly, but slowness becomes contagious here. She reaches the table and offers the napkins first to the woman in green, then to Bruce, her hands careful, as if service can still repair a scene that already moves beyond hospitality. Bruce accepts one and wipes the last moisture from beneath his eye and along the side of his jaw. The motion is precise and unhurried. Ellen realizes, with a particular embarrassment that is more educational than painful, that she reads him wrong from the start. She thinks his stillness means vulnerability. She thinks the larger man has chosen a target he can frighten before the room reacts. Now she understands that what she takes for passivity is measurement, and that misunderstanding reveals how easily people confuse quiet with absence. At the next table, the middle-aged husband leans toward his wife and speaks without taking his eyes off Bruce. He says that the smaller man never loses control. His wife answers that the big one does. Their two observations meet in the middle and complete each other. One is watching technique, the other is watching psychology. Across the room, the man at the bar who recognizes Bruce from the movies begins to understand the specific error he carries into the evening. He expects performance, perhaps speed, perhaps a celebrity's cultivated edge. What he witnesses instead is something that resists the categories of spectacle. Bruce does not look fast in the dramatic sense. He looks early. He does not look angry. He looks finished before the other man knows the decision is made. For witnesses, this is often the hardest part to accept. Not that the event moves quickly, but that it moves without emotional noise. The bodybuilder remains on both knees a second longer than his pride can comfortably justify, and that extra second matters more than people realize. A man can be forced down by surprise and preserve his self-story by calling it bad luck. Remaining there, even briefly, means the body already reaches a conclusion the mind does not yet dress in language. He places one large hand flat against the floorboards, feels the grain under his palm, and begins to rise carefully, first one foot under him, then the other, his jacket still hanging from the back of the chair where he drops it, when confidence feels indestructible. He does not rush. He cannot. The mechanism of the moment is still settling in him. Standing again, he is still enormous, still broad, still visibly powerful. But the room no longer reads that power as final. It reads it as a theory that fails under controlled conditions. When he finally looks at Bruce, the expression is stripped clean of contempt. He rubs his wrist once and says, "I thought you'd swing." Bruce answers, "That would have helped you." The bodybuilder absorbs that, studies the wet table, then says almost to himself, "I was wrong." Bruce gives him the only conclusion he is willing to offer, then leave it there. A moment later, the larger man takes his jacket and walks out beneath the smell of citrus and damp cotton. After Grant walks out, the restaurant does not recover all at once. It resumes in layers, the way a body resumes after impact, first through breath, then through small movement, then through the reluctant return of ordinary sound. A fork touches a plate somewhere near the bar. A chair leg drags softly against the floor. The kitchen door opens and closes, releasing another wash of hot oil, garlic, citrus, and seared meat into the room. And the smell feels almost inappropriate now, too normal for what has just been witnessed. That is often how decisive moments behave. They do not arrive in special worlds. They occur inside ordinary air, under ordinary lights, between half-finished meals and water glasses still sweating onto wood, which is why they stay with people longer than spectacle does. In the years that follow, the story survives because the details are too specific to sound invented. Not the legend first, the details, the black tank top, the green top, the blue shirt with white stripes darkened by water, the wooden table crowded with plates, menus and glasses, the woman's hand pressed to her chest, the bodybuilder leaning in with total certainty. Then the reversal, one knee, then the second. People repeat these things because the mind trusts objects before it trusts meaning, and because meaning takes longer to accept when it humiliates a common belief. Most men are taught, directly or indirectly, that size settles conflict before skill has time to matter. What that restaurant witnesses is not simply the failure of that belief. It is the speed with which it fails once emotion commits where structure has not. Bruce never enlarges the story afterward. That becomes part of the reason it lasts. He does not feed it with performance, does not turn it into an anecdote about pride, and does not use it to decorate his own identity. When similar moments are mentioned, he reduces them to principle. A man reveals his intent, a line opens, force enters the wrong space. The body answers truth before the ego does. To people who want drama, that kind of explanation sounds almost too clean, but cleanliness is part of Bruce's character. He never needs violence to become symbolic when its practical meaning is already complete. He does not escalate in memory any more than he escalates in action. He resolves, then leaves the lesson where it belongs. Grant carries the lesson differently. For him, it does not end at the restaurant door. It follows him into quieter places, into locker rooms, parking lots, late drives home, and those private stretches of time when a man is forced to re-examine the theory he has been living inside. Years later, when younger men speak around him with the loud confidence of people who still think visible power is the same thing as finished power, he tells them the truth without trying to make himself look noble. He says the worst part is not going to his knees. The worst part is understanding, in the same second, that Bruce can do more and chooses not to. Pain would have been easier to process. Pain can be explained away. Restraint cannot. Restraint means the other man is not caught inside emotion. He is operating above it. That realization unsettles proud men more deeply than force ever does, and that becomes the true echo of the night, not embarrassment alone, not the speed of the exchange, not even the public reversal that gives the title its shape. The real echo is philosophical. One man enters the scene believing force is identity, that pressure, size, and certainty naturally produce authority. The other man treats force as a tool that only matters when guided by timing, position, and restraint. Under amber lights, beside a table still marked by spilled water, that difference becomes visible enough for strangers to carry home with them. They do not leave talking about rage, they leave talking about control. That is why the scene closes the way it does. Inside the restaurant, after the room settles and the sound returns in careful fragments, Bruce sits back down. No victory pose, no speech, no need to look around and measure what the witnesses now think of him. The fresh glass of water remains near his hand. The woman in green is still watching him, still trying to understand how someone can move so little and end so much. Bruce turns to her, calm, composed, already back inside the evening that another man tried to break, and his first concern is still the same simple one it is in the immediate aftermath. Whether she is all right, that is the final image that matters. Not the knees, not the humiliation, not even the correction itself. A wet shirt, a quiet table, a man returning to stillness as if stillness is where he lives, and all around him, a room full of people understanding, perhaps for the first time, that assumption reaches first. But control decides where it ends.